Hello. Welcome to this session 4 of the economy aspects of our skeleton key program. And in the last session, we started with the monetary policy, and we majorly talked about how does like the uh, money actually works in. Additionally, we also sought about to discuss what are various measures by which like the money aggregates are measured, and also like how, and the most and one of the foremost concept which we talked about is creation of money supply, whereby how does like the aggregate purchasing power is related with the overall liability of the central monetary authority was linked by us. So we saw that like rise in 100 rupees liability of the RBI, which is like the reserve money, actually led to greater than 100 rupees rise in the overall purchasing power or the overall aggregate money supply. So based on these concept, we will be building on in this session. So first and foremost thing is, let's think on ponder upon on what factors does the credit creation capacity of the banks depend upon. Since in the entirety of the system, the banks were the major players who were actually like creating the credit, because they were the creating liabilities, and then they were creating assets from them, and then those assets were like went on to create additional credit for the consumers and also to the investors as well. So when we know that like the banking banks and the banking intermediaries are the major players in the credit creation of the across the entire economy, the banking habit of the people particularly is of the very highest significance to actually know that what the credit creation capacity of the banks is. So if let's say there is a bank increased banking habit of the people due to financial inclusion, then what would people do? People would be having higher deposits. So these higher deposits would actually be make the lower cost of borrowing and lending for the banks, and then they would like infuse larger credit, and that this would be make the credit cheaper. So the additional credit creation, additional borrowing creation, and everything is driven by the financial inclusion and banking habits of the people. To discuss you further, like why does the black money is like major nemesis can be understood from this thing. So black money nemesis क्यों है, ये इस चीज की वजह से भी दिख सकता है, क्योंकि black money is that money which is out of this banking system. So that part of the economy which would be a significant won't enter the actual financial systems, and this lack of entry would mean that there would be limited resources with the banks, so they would be a decrease in their lending capacity and higher credit for them, higher credit for the the investors and the consumers and so on. So that would higher credit would mean that there would be the lower demand. So in the entirety, that's how the financial inclusion and lack of it actually impacts the credit creation capacity. The next is the monetary policy. I mean, of course, the way by which how does the interest rates are there in the system, what are different instruments and all, we'll see it. But like the monetary policy tools like the CRR, the SLR, the bank rates, uh, uh, MSF, marginal standing facility, these all factors actually like are of the highest significance when we talk about the higher credit creation capacity of the bank. Why? Because if let's say the monetary policy rates are higher for the banks from the RBI, then what would happen? Banks would be having lower resources available to them, lower resources with them, and these lower resources would mean that lower credit creation. So the cycle remains the same. I want you to know, I want you to build such linkages. That's why I am every time there is a linkage based question, every time there is something like which I can explain, I'll explain this. Because if you are able to build such linkages, if you are able to build such connections among the complex systems, economy will never be a problem for you. Why? Because you can actually visualize what sort of systems that actually work in. Then the next would be the policy transmission. If let's say you have already reduced the rates, but the reduction, and who are you? You are RBI. So RBI ने अगर rate कम कर दिए, but what happens? The reduction in rate does not travel from the banks to the from the RBI to the banks and to the consumer. So like here the RBI, there is a bank, and then there is an entire system. So the way like 100 rupee creation of a liability by RBI transmits across the economy is actually like put in place via transmission of monetary policy. So what happens? Even though RBI makes cheaper credit, but the cheaper credit doesn't get transferred to the banks or to the consumer. There are various ways by which this doesn't happen. I'll be discussing this in today's session itself. And next is status of bank. I mean, if let's say the banks have very poor asset quality, what are assets of bank? Loans. So if let's say the loans given by banks have poor performing, what means they are NPAs? What means that they have risk of getting closed, I mean getting not getting paid, then in that case banks run the risk of getting bankrupt. So that's why the status and the quality of banks actually has the greatest role in the credit creation capacity of the banks. If banks have a good balance sheets, then they would mean that like they have cleaner records. They would mean that they would have, they can actually leverage more of their deposits to lending, and thus more will be the credit creation. I hope like you are understanding all the four linkages from here. Let me explain it to one more time. In the entirety of the process of the credit creation and the monetary policy transmission, बैंकों के पास में सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट रोल रहता है. बिकॉज वाई बैंक्स act as the intermediaries between the central bank and the consumer. अगर बैंक्स का मेजर रोल है तो फिर बैंकिंग हैबिट ऑफ द पीपल एंड देयर फिनेंशियल इंक्लूजन प्लेज द ग्रेटेस्ट रोल. कैसे? अब अगर लोगों की बैंकिंग हैबिट ज्यादा है तो फिर वो ज्यादा डिपॉजिट करेंगे बैंक में पैसे, तो फिर बैंक्स के पास में ज्यादा मनी होगा लेंड करने के लिए, तो फिर व्हाट दे विल डू, दे विल गिव क्रेडिट चीपर, सस्ते में पैसे देंगे लोगों को और उसके बाद में ज्यादा लोगों को पैसे देंगे. सो दैट्स व्हाई क्रेडिट क्रिएशन बिकम्स लार्जर. ऑन द कॉन्ट्ररी टू इट, व्हेन देयर इज अ ब्लैक मनी, जबकि लोगों के पास या फिर जहां पे बैंकिंग हैबिट कम है वहां पे बैंक के पास में डिपॉजिट भी कम है, तो फिर वहां पे बैंक के पास में लेंड करने के लिए भी कम है, तो फिर वहां पे कॉस्टलियर एंड लोअर क्रेडिट होगा. गॉट इट. सेकेंड इज मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी ट्रांसमिशन. सो बैंक्स के पास में पैसा जो आता है वो केवल डिपॉजिट से ही नहीं आता, तो वो आरबीआई की बोरोइंग से भी आता है. तो मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी रेट्स आर दोज रेट्स जनरली बाय विच बैंक्स बोरो फ्रॉम द आरबीआई. अब वो या फिर बैंक्स कीप दैट मनी विथ आरबीआई. ऐसे बहुत सारे रेट्स रहते हैं, हम लोग ये इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स के बारे में पढ़ेंगे. पर यहां पे समझने वाली बात है कि ये जो रेट्स है ना, अगर ये रेट ज्यादा रहेंगे तो फिर व्हाट हैपन, banks will have the higher cost of borrowing, higher cost of deposits, so they will be giving low credit. Third is monetary policy transmission. Even though there are lower interest rates, even though like there are the signaling of it, पर अगर ट्रांसमिशन ही नहीं हो रहा, मतलब जिस तरीके से आरबीआई के बैंक के पास में जा रहा है और बैंक से कंज्यूमर के, फिर कंज्यूमर से और इंटरमीडिएट के पास में जा रहा है, अगर ये सिस्टम ही नहीं चल रहा, विच इज कॉल्ड एज मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी ट्रांसमिशन, ये नहीं है, तो फिर ये भी क्रेडिट क्रिएशन कैपेसिटी को इंपैक्ट करता है. एंड फोर्थ इज स्टेटस ऑफ बैंक्स. अगर बैंक्स की एसेट क्वालिटी पुअर है तो फिर बैंक क्या करेगी, हिचकिचाएगी लोन देने में. बैंक बोलेगी क्या पता यार ये भी डूब जाए, मुझे नहीं पता, तो फिर the bank will prefer to keep those assets with themselves or rather have they been safest of the condition, or or that will, or they will lend on the higher interest rate. Why? Because वो बोलेगा कि डूबेगा तो भी चलेगा, ज्यादा रिस्क लेंगे, रिस्क है तो मतलब इश्क है, कहने वाली बात। तो एसेट क्वालिटी ऑफ द बैंक्स, एसेट क्या है? बैंक के लोन्स है, तो फिर बैंक के लोन्स कितने क्वालिटी के हैं, उसमें एनपीएस कैसे है, क्रेडिट वर्दीनेस है क्या बोरोवर का, उस बेसिस पे स्टेटस ऑफ बैंक्स क्रेडिट क्रिएशन डिसाइड करता है। बट इन एनी ऑफ द केसेस दी, even though like the money supply is 100, the money supply increases more than 100 in the entire process. We have looked at it from the previous basis. Moving forward, let's discuss how does like the monetary system in India work. So monetary meant by the money, and here I'll be talking particularly about the system of printing of currency and what are how like the money is created in India. Till few years ago, like I mean in the initial days, uh, we had the managed currency system. So what issue of new money is actually exclusive right of RBI. RBI, it only and only RBI can actually like issue new money. तब तभी तो वो नोट पे लिखा हुआ रहता है कि मैं अदा धारक को अदा करने का वचन लेता हूं, और फिर आरबीआई गवर्नर के साइन रहते हैं। तो that's what it means, that exclusive right of RBI. But like union government is also responsible for increase and decrease of money supply. Why? Because the RBI is actually banker to government. So how and why the government actually sells its bonds and creates its deposits, or takes out loans, also impact the money supply. तो ये भी एक फैक्ट है। I'll be discussing in next session RBI and its functions, there I will discuss it in further। पर अभी ये समझ लो कि since RBI जो है वो गवर्नमेंट की बैंक है, तो फिर हम लोग को जैसे जब भी लोन चाहिए रहता है, द when we want to create deposits, when we want to create assets, when we want to like create borrowings, उन सब केस में what we will do, we go to banks. Similarly government goes to the RBI, and RBI does it via printing of notes, creation of notes, or creation of money. तो ये एक सिस्टम था। पर अभी क्या है कि एंड दैट सिस्टम वाज डन विद द एंड इन द and that system in the earlier days was done on the basis of minimum reserve system. So what does minimum reserve system means? You RBI had to keep a portion as a reserves to actually secure printing of money, and that was actually like rupees 200 crore. अभी भी उतना ही है जितना तब था, एंड इवन इन दैट 115 करोड़ का गोल्ड है, और फिर रिमेनिंग 85 करोड़ का फॉरेन सिक्योरिटीज एंड बाकी सब कुछ है। तो टोटल रिजर्व जो है ना वो कुछ लगभग 200 करोड़ रुपए के, एंड दे कीप दिस रिजर्व सिस्टम टू एक्ट एज अ सिक्योरिटी, एक्ट एज अ ट्रस्ट इन दी करेंसी विच इज एक्चुअली इशूड बाय द आरबीआई। तो लोगों में ट्रस्ट रही कि अब भाई कोई पैसा, सैम कल वाला अपने कल वाले सेशन वाला सैम आया, सैम ऑस्ट्रेलियन सिटीजन है, सैम 500 रुपए का नोट लेके गया अपने आरबीआई के पास में, उसने बोला कि भैया मेरे को तो तुम्हारे पे बिलीव नहीं आ रहा, मेरे को अपना 500 रुपए का जो भी परचेसिंग पावर होता है वो मेरे को दो। तो फिर इस 500 इस फॉरेन सिक्योरिटीज में से ऑस्ट्रेलियन डॉलर निकाले और आरबीआई ने उसको दे दिए। तो दैट्स हाउ इट वर्क्स। बट थियोरेटिकली ये वैसे ऐसे वर्क करता है, प्रैक्टिकली ऐसे वर्क नहीं करता, बिकॉज वाई वी हैव सोवेरेन गवर्नमेंट। सोवेरेन गवर्नमेंट हैज द कंसोलिडेटेड फंड ऑफ इंडिया, कि जिसके बेसिस पे हम लोग बहुत सारी चीजें कर सकते हैं। देन ऑल्सो वी हैव आरबीआई हैज द रिजर्व्स, देन गवर्नमेंट हैज बॉन्ड्स। तो बहुत सारी चीजें हैं कि जो कॉन्फिडेंस बना के रखते हैं, दैट मेंटेन ट्रस्ट, दैट क्रिएट ऑल ऑफ इट। दूसरी बात क्या है कि करंटली अभी रुपीज 20 लाख करोड़ से भी ज्यादा कैश है। अगर 20 लाख करोड़ से भी ज्यादा कैश है तो फिर 200 करोड़ रुपए का रिजर्व लेके आप क्या करोगे? कुछ सेंस भी नहीं बनता। सो दैट्स व्हाई लाइक द मिनिमम रिजर्व सिस्टम actually like currently works in, it's only the minimum reserve, but it's not actually like the pegged or the I mean full bodied system, या फिर fully tokenized system, or what what can be the name for it? Fully, here it is given, uh, uh, here representative full bodied, whereby like the assets are backing it. So it's actually like the partially full bodied, not the completely full bodied, and it's a based on the minimum reserve. And you just need to know that like the RBI only has the exclusive right to print, uh, like exclusive right to issue notes. However, uh, usme there is only one cash, like rupees one note is actually rupees one. So there is one catch, which is that let me rupees one note and coins are actually issued by Ministry of Finance. So I guess like even if the such statement comes in the paper whereby like they ask you ki issue of new money is exclusive right of R RBI, तो फिर उसको सही बोल सकते हो in the saying the context, because this is an exception. But the entire monetary policy and entire monetary system works in this on this basis. So I hope like you'll be able to do it with, but it's good to know about this detail. uh, Another thing is that subject to maintenance of such reserves, the RBI is empowered to print unlimited currency against backing of gold, foreign securities, and securities of government of India. So RBI is actually empowered to print unlimited money, but depending upon whatever monetary policy it has, depending upon whatever macroeconomic measures there are, and depending upon what sort of growth, development, inflation trajectories are there, RBI takes into account what to do and what not to do. But you need to know a bit of thing is that gold are 115 crore, and then foreign securities are right less 85 crore rupees, and then there are close to 200 crore rupees of it. uh, उसके बाद में printing of money by RBI is actually done in two ways. अब इससे भी ज्यादा तरीके हो सकते हैं, पर बात क्या है कि अब दो तरीके तुमको पता करना बहुत जरूरी है या फिर जानना बहुत जरूरी है. सो फर्स्ट अमॉन्ग्स देम इज दिस थिंग विच इज कॉल्ड एज प्राइमरी सब्सक्रिप्शन, which is deficit financing. So what does RBI do? RBI asks, rather what does government do? Government actually issues bonds of, let's say, rupees I'm sorry, just give me a second, I'll have some water. So first is primary subscription of government bonds by RBI. So what does government want? Government wants RBI to print some money and give it to him. So what does government do? Government takes out a bond paper and gives writes 10 crore bonds and gives it to RBI, whereby it would say that RBI, you take my bonds and you give me money. RBI says, how will I do? Government says that you go, you print money for the 10 crore rupees and then give them to me and take my bonds. I'll pay you back after a certain period. That's what the bond means ना. Bond क्या है? Bond एक debt instruments है कि जिसके अनुसार एक फ्यूचर डेट पे जिसके पास में बॉन्ड है उसको जो फेस वैल्यू है उसके हिसाब से पैसे मिलते हैं. तो ये जो 10 करोड़ के बॉन्ड जो गवर्नमेंट ने इशू करे हैं, जो एक कमिटमेंट है, एक ऑब्लिगेशन है फ्यूचर डेट पे पे बैक करने का, वो उसने आरबीआई को दिए और आरबीआई ने डायरेक्टली मनी प्रिंट करके गवर्नमेंट को 100 करोड़ रुपए दिए. ये तो सबसे पहला तरीका है. ये क्या है? प्रिंटिंग मनी है, ये है डेफिसिट फाइनेंसिंग है. Another way what it is, government goes to the RBI and says, I want a bit of debt from you, I want something more from you, I want something like a bit of debt from you. So what does government do? what does government do? Government goes to the RBI, which is government's banker. Then uh, uh, what will the RBI do? RBI, rather than giving money directly to the government, RBI would ask government to give him or her rupees 10 crore bonds. And here, instead of printing money directly, government would actually sell and auction those bonds to the ICICI or other banks, or let's say like you and me via RBI retail direct portal. And the 10 crore money collected from the auction of those bonds would actually be given to the RBI. So this is called as like the uh, uh, this is actually called as fiscal deficit financing. So what government is doing? Government is actually borrowing from ICICI. Government is borrowing from the market. Government is borrowing from the citizens and all the stuff, the other things. So in all of it, like the creation of credit is actually, or the infusion of money in the economy is done by the government. However, in one case, what happens? The money is directly printed out by the government and it's called as primary subscription. But in second case, government is actually borrowing from the market and trying to infuse the money via credit creation, like the system which we had done earlier. So deficit financing is whereby M MO increases. What was MO? MO was high powered money. MO was total liability of the central bank. Liability of central bank. So all the money in circulation, what is the liability of the central bank, and it leads to printing of money. However, when RBI sells the same government securities to other banks like the ICICI and collects money and gives it to government, it's not the deficit financing. Why? Because like I mean, government, the liability of the central bank hasn't increased by much. But what happened? Liability of the government has increased. The debt of the government has increased. The fiscal deficits of government have been served well. So it's called as deficit, fiscal deficit financing. So even though government has unlimited power to print money, government, it wouldn't actually like serve any purpose of eliminating poverty, because it does not create real resources. Why the real resources aren't being created? In the deficit financing case, government is actually borrowing from the market and then again giving to the market in the hope that this transmission would actually create additional credit, or like they channelize the resources, mobilize the resources to the effective way. So what happens? uh, ICICI के पास में एक्चुअल में डिपॉजिट्स हैं, and those deposits are for, let's say, rupees 10 crore. ICICI was actually not sure where to spend it and what to do with it. RBI takes the bonds of GSEC, which are like the of the highest security and highest grade, and gives 100 crore to the 10 crore to the government. Then government, what does? Government spends it on R&D. Government spends it on like the creation of infrastructure. This R&D, this infrastructure would actually create spillover of rupees, let's say, 78 crore. So this additional 68 crore of growth development actually is motivated in the economy by this action of deficit financing by the government. So this action is actually good, but in actuality, in reality, what happens? These resources aren't actually effectively utilized, or rather there is a case of inflation as well. So though the government has power to print unlimited money, but the printing money cannot eliminate poverty or cross development or growth, because it does not necessarily mean creation of real asset. If let's say government printed 10 crore rupees and then it it was given to hospital, uh, it becomes a good case of use of money. But even in this case also, a real resource is not converted. Rather, resources of private sector are transferred from the private sector to the government, and the value of money is actually reduced. Why? Because there is additional infusion of money. Let me like discuss it one more time again. uh, Government prints money, and then what happens, there is this becomes in addition to whatever exists in the economy. And this creates additional disposable income. This disposable income, if there are similar kind of goods, then will create inflation. So even if there is a additional impetus to the growth, even if there is an additional focus on creation of valuable asset, but the value of asset themselves increases. Why? Because there is inflation. So this actually nullifies the overall effect of infusion of money. On the contrary, there can be even detrimental effect to it as well, which happens by something called as price level rise or inflation. So take an example of that. So let's say initially there was 1,000 rupees of money supply in the economy, and then there were 100 goods. So out of 100 goods, what happened? They were priced in at a each good was priced in at a 10 rupee. So 70 goods were bought in by the private sector and 30 goods were brought in by the government sector. Assume that thing. But what happens now? Government actually printed 400 rupees. So total amount of money supply in the government became 1400. But since the production of goods is actually 10 itself, now to ensure that for every good to be matched with the supply and with the demand, the price match becomes in. So now 1400 money is chasing for the 100 goods. Earlier 10,000 rupees was chasing the 100 goods. So by this way, the 10 rupee price actually gets risen to 14 rupees. Again, let me explain it one more time. Overall, government can actually print money and actually like give give it to everyone. Government will say that ये लो पैसे, ये लो पैसे, ये लो पैसे, तुम क्यों गरीब हो, तुम क्यों गरीब हो, तुम क्यों गरीब हो. वो ऐसा इसीलिए नहीं करता है, उसके दो कारण है. क्योंकि उससे एडिशनल रिसोर्स नहीं बनता है. देयर इज no additional resource. Why there is no additional resource? Government is creating is printing money from either by borrowing or by focusing on the future borrowing of it. Future borrowing कैसे कि भैया मतलब अब deferred payment देगा, आगे वाला बॉन्ड देगा. उन दोनों केस में printing of money actually leads to reduction in the money value. Why? Because there is no real resource creation. This can be understood by the fact that if let's say there is 1,000 rupees of money in the economy and there are 100 goods, then 1,000 rupees were chasing the 100 goods, creating the price level of 10. However, if government prints the 400 additional rupees, the overall aggregate money supply becomes the 1400. Then what would this 1400 do? If the goods remain the same, then this 1400 would be chasing the 100 goods. Then thus the 10 rupee price would become to the 14 rupees price. Hence, the additional resources are not created, rather only redistribution of resources happens in. And this transfer of resources also is not in good faith. How it's not in good faith? Why? Because there happens a inflation, or rather we can say a inflation tax, which is kind of a hidden tax. So earlier, if let's say government wasn't actually infusing the 400 rupees, private sector was having particular good at rupees 10. But since government has actually infused 400 rupees, private sector now would have to buy the good at 14 rupees. So 4 रुपए से जो बढ़ा वो इन्फ्लेशन टैक्स है. एंड सेकेंडली द इन्फ्लेशन टैक्स से रिडिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ मनी कैसे हो रहा है? द 4 रुपीज जो एडिशनली देना पड़ रहा है, दैट 4 रुपीज एडिशनल इज एक्चुअली फाइनेंस्ड बाय द प्राइवेट सेक्टर टू द गवर्नमेंट. कैसे? क्योंकि गवर्नमेंट ने जो 400 रुपीज प्रिंट किया है वो या तो टैक्सेशन से वसूल करेगा, या तो वो वसूल करेगा मतलब बोरोइंग से, बोरोइंग फ्रॉम द बैंक्स. तो बोरोइंग फ्रॉम द बैंक्स जो है, ये बोरोइंग फ्रॉम द बैंक्स, ये पैसा किसके पास है? दिस मनी आल्सो बिलोंग्स टू द सिटीजन, हाउस होल्ड पब्लिक्स ना. तो in this sense it creates an inflationary tax kind of scenario. So that's why it is always a moral hazard. It's a moral hazard, it's a financial hazard to actually like do the deficit financing and printing of money in this way. This creates actually a bit of like concern. However, there has been significant legal frameworks for it, and the legal framework is the FRBM Act. The legal framework is the FRBM Act, whereby uh, the fiscal responsibility and budgetary management of the governments are actually like uh, uh, made mandated under a legal systematic framework. And then there is like a macroeconomic policy for it, then there is a medium term fiscal policy for it, then there is like how actually like this levels are being decided, what should be the debt level. Everything is actually like mandated, and accountability of the government in doing so is actually mentioned it. So in the pre-reform era, so right now after FRBM, then after like I think 2018, whereby the primary subscription of the RBI, of the government bond by RBI stopped. So primary subscription is stopped. I mean, direct printing of money and then giving it to government is actually not possible nowadays. So earlier that was the case. That used to be done by ways and means of advance, that used to be done by the deficit financing and all. But अब नहीं होता वो. अब और होता भी है तो फिर there are many legal regulations for it. So earlier case mein reserve money, the money supply was increased by the deficit financing, but after the reforms now in today's era, it's majorly done by few things. First and foremost of it is increase in foreign reserves. So what happens if, let's say, you are a RBI, and someone and someone is someone, let's say my friend Naman puts a factory, and Naman puts a chocolate factory. So there is a Mondelez, which is a Japanese company. It wants to invest with the Naman. So what would they do? They would go to Naman and give them 10 million Japanese yen. अब इंडिया में ना ही जापानीज येन लीगल टेंडर है, ना ही कुछ हो सकता है, तो फिर नमन डजंट एक्सेप्ट जापानीज येन. So what does like these Mondelez would do? Mondelez would go to RBI and they would ask them to give rupees equivalent to the 10 million, and then they would give it to Naman. So and RBI would keep those 10 million yen as a reserve with them. So that has been the case, increasing the case with it. Now currently also like our foreign forex reserve have been reached till the extent of almost rupees 600 billion dollars. So this continuous increase in the foreign reserves and equivalent influx of the rupees in the market has been like the major cause of increase in reserve money. Second is there is inherent higher demand for the money. What does inherent higher demand for the money mean? People need money to spend. People need money to actually like make transactions. People need money to actually have the investment. So since there is a rising middle class, there is a rising consumerism, there is a rising growth story of the India's economy, everything means that there is a higher demand for money, and this higher demand for money actually leads to higher reserve money. Then again there is a like increase in net credit to the government. So even though there is a lower deficit financing nowadays, but government borrowing has increased in terms of absolute numbers too. So this government increase in borrowing of the government means that there is increasing reserve money, because we saw that like how does printing of money and how does every system like works in this in the economy. uh, depending upon all the and I mean like the reverse happens. If the dollar leaves India, mo will decrease. Why? Because people will be like cashing out the dollars, and then giving in rupee. uh, Now building onto this, I hope like you have understood what reserve money is, how does like it creates inflationary tax, how does like the printing of money takes place. There are various instruments for it. I'll be discussing various instruments in the next session. But every concept, every discussion, every linkages that I am trying to make you build in, that I am trying to make you think of, please be very considerate of it, because like the every flow, like here discuss, like I have here discussed, like I here discuss, like I have discussed in the credit creation, then the in the above thing, you need to understand, you need to know about these concepts. Now talk about what actually we talked about, what money is, what are various aggregates of for money, what are various functions of money, then how money is actually printed, created, distributed, circulated. Then we need to understand like what's the पॉलिसी बेसिस बिहाइंड इट, मतलब अब ये सब कुछ हो रहा है तो उसके पीछे का प्रिंसिपल क्या है. तो प्रिंसिपल जो है ना, वो प्रिंसिपल है मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी. सो इट्स अ कंपोनेंट ऑफ इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसी through which central bank regulates the money supply in the economy. This is very important. So the by which way the central bank regulates the money supply in the economy is actually called as the monetary policy, and it is done by various instruments under which the availability, cost and use of money and credit in the economy is actually regulated. Like I've told you, the instruments, what are the instruments? They can be SLR, they can be CRR, they can be bank rates, they can be LAF, they can be MSF, they can be LTRO, long term repo operations, they can be operation twist, and so on. यूजिंग इन सारे इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स को यूज करके सेंट्रल बैंक अवेलेबिलिटी, कॉस्ट एंड यूज ऑफ मनी एंड क्रेडिट इन द इकोनॉमी रेगुलेट करता है. एंड व्हाट वाई ये सब रेगुलेट करना है, क्योंकि इसी रेट पे, बिकॉज ऑफ द मनी, बिकॉज ऑफ इट, प्राइस स्टेबिलिटी एक्चुअली इज मोस्ट इज डिपेंडेंट अपॉन. अभी मैंने बताया ना कि मनी सप्लाई कितना है और गुड्स को हम लोग कांस्टेंट माने, तो फिर कितने मनी कितने गुड्स को चेस कर रहे हैं उसके हिसाब से प्राइस डिसाइड होता है. सेकेंडली, टू प्रमोट इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ, इफ लेट्स से देयर इज अ फॉर इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ, credit is most important factor. Credit is a factor. Also, demand is a factor. क्रेडिट एंड डिमांड दोनों चीजें मनी सप्लाई पे बेस्ड है. अगर बहुत ज्यादा मनी सप्लाई होगा तो फिर चीपर क्रेडिट रहेगा, तो फिर ग्रेटर इन्वेस्टमेंट रहेगी. बहुत ज्यादा मनी सप्लाई रहेगा तो फिर ग्रेटर परचेसिंग पावर रहेगी, हायर डिमांड रहेगी, तो फिर हायर इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ रहेगी. सिमिलर इज द केस विद फाइनेंशियल सेक्टर स्टेबिलिटी. अब इन्फ्लेशन कैसा है उस हिसाब से बैंक्स कैसे फंक्शन करते हैं, काम करेंगे, उसी हिसाब से अदर इकोनॉमिक सिस्टम्स लाइक एनबीएफसीज काम करेंगे, तो फाइनेंशियल सेक्टर के स्टेबिलिटी के लिए पे. एंड मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग इज एक्सचेंज रेट स्टेबिलिटी के लिए. व्हाई? बिकॉज जैसे हमने यहां पे देखा कि इंक्रीज और डिक्रीज ऑफ फॉरेन रिजर्व्स एक्चुअली क्रिएट्स और रिड्यूसेस द रिजर्व मनी. On the contrary also happens if let's say there is a too much of money, then that what too much of money would mean that there is a lower demand, and lower demand would mean that lower exchange rates. So lower exchange rate would mean that like the costlier foreign currency. So that's how the foreign currency makes. And then again, of course, I mean there is employment generation. Why? Because growth, development and everything like is related with the price stability, the group creation of demand, creation of the investable capital, creation of credit and so on. The main question lies with the fact that we have already talked and discussed a lot that money actually, so let me talk it about one more time. Money actually creates the purchasing power, and it actually creates demand. And actually the entire exercise of monetary policy is actually a dilemma between two things. It's a trade-off between two things. For one thing is inflation control, and another thing is economic growth. So what happens when we have money, Having large sums of money, having greater aggregate amount of money means that there is a larger increasing purchasing power, and the increased purchasing power actually means that there is a greater demand for goods, and this greater demand would actually like lead to greater investment and greater productive assets, and then like greater growth. I hope like this cycle is clear to you. However, what happens when there is a greater demand for growth goods, uh, there can be a possibility that there wouldn't be commensurate supply. So if let's say there isn't a commensurate supply, then that would automatically lead to the inflation, that is price rise. So the entire exercise between the monetary policy is how to handle this monetary policy dilemma. Why this happens? Like one of the government actually wants to have the economic growth. It actually wants to have the it wants to showcase the numbers of high GDP growth, high quantitative measures of increased, let's say, the sectoral growth, gross value additions, and so on. However, the monetary authority, which is like often which is the RBI in case, it is mandated with the price control and inflation control in India via monetary policy committee framework, which I'll be discussing about. But moving forward, you should understand that why do we need monetary policy? What's the like most significant aspect of it is to handle this monetary policy dilemma, whereby if money supply increases, अगर money supply increase होता है तो फिर उससे aggregate demand बढ़ती है, और aggregate demand बढ़ती है तो फिर उससे growth होती है. On the contrary, aggregate demand बढ़ने से uh, aggregate demand बढ़ने से there can be a case whereby there is not the commensurate increase in the supply, and that would lead to increase in prices. तो इन दोनों के बीच में जो बैलेंसिंग होनी चाहिए वो मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी डिलेमा है. The thing is, RBI wants to achieve the second objective of the policy control. It wants to achieve second objective of economic growth, but it wants to have the first objective of price control. Why? Because of the monetary policy committee. And this monetary policy committee actually is based on the fact that there is a single objective of price control, there is a single target of 4 plus minus 2% of CPI targeting, and then single instrument which is of the repo rate. So I hope like this entire exercise of monetary policy in India is clear to you. So single objective is price stability, a single target is like the of the CPI, and which is like 4 plus minus 2%, and single instrument is adjusting the repo rate. So what happens, since we have seen that the monetary policy or the policy rate depend upon the repo rate, the reverse repo rate, the SLR, the CLR, the forex, the MTF, and LAF, and so on. So many things are there, but they often get confused with each other, and then I mean having establishing a single concrete cause effect relationship becomes quite difficult in that case. So to actually simplify this, Urjit Patel committee in 2015 recommended inflation targeting as the only policy framework, as the only monetary policy benchmark for the monetary system and monetary policy in India, and it is driven by single objective, single target, and single instrument. I hope this is clear. They and now since we know that like how does monetary policy work in India, what are its objective, there are different types of monetary policy, there are different stances of the monetary authority of India which actually guide the market. So actually the entire exercise of monetary policy is not only about the actual thing of the like where the money is, what are actual interest rate, but it is also about the speculation for it or the future trajectory for it. So this future trajectory and future speculation becomes very crucial with respect to the types of monetary policy. One thing is like the expansionary monetary policy, which is also called as the easy money policy, or also it's often referred as dovish dove. dovish monetary policy. So where this monetary policy promotes easier money, it promotes higher money aggregate, and it promotes cheaper money. So it means that there is a cheaper credit also. So what would happen? It would automatically give push to the economic growth, since the easier money would actually like favor the increase in aggregate demand. The easy money would mean that there is decrease in cost of borrowing. So this would mean that like the consumer durables or the heavy purchases are actually drawn into. So it is actually favored when there is a economic slowdown or the recession. When there is a not sufficient demand, then generally monetary authorities would tend to have the easy money or expansionary policy. This was very prominent in the case of post covid-19 post covid-19, where there was like not only slowdown, but there was decrease in the overall gdp, and governments and monetary policies across the world wanted to have a phenomenon whereby the all the actors and all the players who have transactive motives in the economy would have cheaper access to credit, would who have cheaper money to it. And it is driven by policy instruments like the CRR, SLR, repo rate, reverse rate. We'll be discussing this in the next session, whereby like I'll be taking each instrument and discussing how it works with it. But for now, you should know that like decrease in the policy rates, decrease in the repo rate, decrease in the borrowing rates, or like the easier money, cheaper money would mean that there is an expansionary monetary policy whereby there is a higher availability of money in the economy. On the contrary, exactly opposite of it is contractionary monetary policy, which is also called a tight or hawkish monetary policy. So whereby like the objective, since in the easy money objective was the growth, in the easy money objective was the easier credit, in it was like the increase in the investment and so on. Here that would be exact opposite of it. In the monetary policy dilemma, the entire fight was between whether it was growth or whether it's what's inflation, or whether the between it. So in the contractionary monetary policy, the objective is to control inflation and also check the depreciation of money. What happens in case of the easy money? It means that let me like in case of easy money, there would be higher money availability. So it may lead to like depreciation of the money. Why? Because money ज़्यादा है तो फिर अब depression, because there can be decrease in demand. So that can actually lead to depreciation of the currency. However, when there is like a depreciation of currency or when there is a inflation, generally contractionary monetary policy is used, and whereby RBI actually sucks out the liquidity from the economy. So cash measures or the availability of credit, availability of money, availability of aggregates are actually reduced. So here what happens, like the money supply gets reduced, so the demand actually gets reduced, because why? There is a decrease in purchasing power. अब तुम्हारे पास में लोन ही कम अवेलेबल है, कॉस्टलियर लोन्स अवेलेबल है, फिर उसके बाद में मोर चेक्स है, क्वांटिटेटिव मेजर्स है, तो फिर what you will do, you wouldn't spend that amount of money, rather you will like have it with you, and that would actually like create reduced inflation. It would actually like lower the inflation. On the contrary, since there is a reduced demand, the economic growth will also be slowed down. And so this both of these contractionary and hawkish monetary policies are often done by something called as open market operations. Open market operations. So open market operations are buying and selling of government securities or bonds by monetary authority, which is RBI. So buying of bonds mean that, so if let's say this is RBI and this is the bond holder, So let me so this is RBI and this is bondholder. So if let's say RBI is buying bonds, so RBI is buying bonds, buy. So what does when RBI buys bond from it, RBI actually gives buyer the money. So this money actually this money gets in the hands with the of the seller, and this money actually like gets transmitted across it, across the monetary policy transmission players, like we discussed in the last session. Similarly, when RBI sells bonds, so when RBI sells bonds, what it does, it the buyer actually gives money to RBI. So it sucks money out of the economy. I hope like this is clear for you. I'm discussing it again. And this buying and selling is called as open market operations. We will discuss this in the next class. But what happens when both of these, when like the traditional measures of the CRR, SLR, or the bank rate, CRR, SLR, bank rate, or like the open market operation, when they fail to actually like give impetus to the sluggishness and slowdown in the economy, developed economies have resorted to something called as quantitative easing. तो फिर से एक बार मैं बताता हूं, जो बैंक रेट, सीआरआर, एसएलआर, ओपन मार्केट ऑपरेशंस टाइप के जो ऑपरेशन, जो कि कन्वेंशनल मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी ऑपरेशंस है, उनके सहारे अगर स्लो डाउन कम नहीं हो रहा हो, या फिर ग्रोथ नहीं बढ़ रही हो, या फिर रिसेशन कम नहीं हो रहा हो, तो उस केस में डेवलप्ड इकोनॉमीज की मॉनेटरी अथॉरिटीज एक ऐसा चीज करती है कि जो थोड़ा सा अनकन्वेंशनल रहता है इन टर्म्स ऑफ मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी मेजर्स. इट इज कॉल्ड एज क्वांटिटेटिव ईजिंग. इट्स अ वेरी पॉपुलर थिंग इन इट केम आउट in the most prominent in the 2008 subprime crisis, when there was like the recession in the US due to the subprime crisis and the asset categorization, asset liquidation which happened. But this has again been done by the US Fed in the aftermath of COVID. So what it is, the quantitative easing actually is asset purchase program by the central banks of the countries, and it's generally resorted in the developed countries. In India it is not so much popular. I'll tell you why, but first like you understand, it's generally resorted in the developed countries. It's an asset purchase program, and it's an unconventional measure, and it's generally done when there is when even when there is a low interest rate, there is a sluggish growth, and there is a limited impetus to the increased demand and the increased product and growth uptake. It happens by way of promoting economic growth by three different ways. Firstly, you understand the concept of bond yield. So what bond yield is? So bonds are basically a debt instrument. So if let's say I am a NFU founder, and I want to raise some money. So what I do, I raise NFU bonds of let's say coupon rate of 100 of 10%, and I issue them at the face value of 100. So me me as a founder of NFU, I actually raise 100 rupees face value bond at the coupon rate of 10%. What does it mean? So at the maturity, and let's say these are for 10 years. So what happens at the maturity of 10 years, the holder of the bond would get the 100 rupees, and every year the holder of the bond would get 10% interest rate on the face value, which is actually the coupon. However, what happens is NFU would start building up the trust. NFU would start making up the money. NFU would actually be open up new avenues, and people would feel that NFU is more reliable compared to other institutions. So this actually would promote people to buy bonds of NFU, since the 100 rupee bond face value bonds of NFU are favored by the menu. So by the menu, so what they would do is they would ask the holder of the bond and offer them 101 rupees to actually give them the bond of 10 rupee coupon. फिर से एक बार मैं बताता हूं, एनएफयू ने 100 रुपए का एक बॉन्ड 10 साल के लिए निकाला, 10 years, जिसका की कूपन रेट था 10%। तो क्या था, कूपन रेट पे 10% का पैसा लोगों को मिलेगा। अब एनएफयू का बॉन्ड है तो फिर एनएफयू अच्छा काम करता है, एनएफयू का ट्रस्ट है, एनएफयू बढ़िया काम भी कर रहा है, एनएफयू के पास में विश्वासार्हता भी है, पैसा भी है, सब कुछ है। तो बाकी लोगों को क्या लगता है कि बाकी दूसरों के बॉन्ड लेने की बजाय वो एनएफयू के ही बॉन्ड ले ले। पर बॉन्ड, जिसके पास में बॉन्ड है उसको भी तो पैसा कमाना है, वो थोड़ी ना तुमको बॉन्ड देगा। वो तो जिसको बॉन्ड खरीदना है वो बोलेगा कि मेरे को 10 साल बाद 100 रुपया मिलना है ना, तू एक काम कर, मेरे को इसको 101 रुपए का दे दे बॉन्ड। तो 101 रुपए, सो 10 रुपए 100 रुपए उसका फेस वैल्यू था, 101 रुपए उसका प्राइस बन गया, और कूपन तो उसका 10% का वो रहा ही। तो पहले उसको 10/100 विच इज इक्वल टू, कूपन रेट 10 है, ये 100 है, तो फिर अब ये अब ये कितना बना, ये बना 10%। तो 10% पहले की ईल्ड बनी। तो पहले जो बॉन्ड होल्डर था उसके पास में उसको 10% रिटर्न ऑन हिज इन्वेस्टमेंट था, या फिर 10% उसकी ईल्ड थी इन द टेक्निकल टर्म्स। पर अब जब किसी ने 101 रुपए में उसका बॉन्ड लिया, तो व्हाट डज इट मीन, उसका ये कितना हुआ, उसका हुआ 10/101। तो ये 10/101 10/100 से तो छोटा ही रहेगा। सो उसको जो एनुअल रिटर्न मिल रहा होगा वो 10% से कम मिल रहा होगा। तो ऐसे बॉन्ड यील्ड जो है वो प्राइस के इनवर्सली प्रोपोर्शनल रहती है। दूसरा बात क्या है कि अगर कोई बॉन्ड ज्यादा सेफ है तो उन बॉन्ड्स के लिए ग्रेटर डिमांड रहेगी। अब जैसे एनएफयू का ही बॉन्ड देख लो, एनएफयू का बॉन्ड हमने 100 रुपीज फेस वैल्यू पे निकाला था, बट सिंस पीपल एंड मार्केट रियलाइज दैट एनएफयू इज अ ट्रस्टवर्दी ऑप्शन, एनएफयू इज अ सेफ ऑप्शन, सो people started approaching NFU for getting their bonds. I mean the secondary bond holders of it. अगर अप्रोच करेंगे तो फिर डिमांड बढ़ेगी, डिमांड बढ़ेगी तो प्राइस बढ़ेगा, और प्राइस जैसे ही बढ़ेगा वैसे यील्ड कम होगी। कैसे, वो मैंने अभी बताया। कूपन रेट फिक्स रहता है, फेस वैल्यू फिक्स रहती है, पर प्राइस वैरी होता है, यील्ड वैरी होती है। कैसे, दोनों की इनवर्स रिलेशन से। आई होप लाइक यू गॉट द पॉइंट। बहुत लोग इसमें कंफ्यूज रहते हैं, बहुत लोगों को नहीं पता रहता, but this is very important concept and this should be understood. The difference between face value is that value की जो at the maturity of bond 10 साल बाद वो बॉन्ड रिटर्न करके कितना पैसा मिलेगा, वो फेस वैल्यू उसकी। और प्राइस क्या है कि उस टाइम पे वो प्राइस किस रुपीस से बॉन्ड ट्रेड हो रहा है, एक्सचेंज हो रहा है, वो उसका प्राइस है। कूपन रेट क्या है कि फेस वैल्यू के कितना परसेंट पे उसको इंटरेस्ट मिलेगा, वो उसका कूपन है। जनरली ये यील्ड के बराबर नहीं रहता है, या फिर रहता भी, यील्ड के बराबर तभी रहेगा जब प्राइस और फेस वैल्यू सेम रहेगा, पर ये नहीं रहता है। तो क्या रहता है, वो प्राइस जैसे ही बढ़ेगा वैसे वैसे यील्ड कम होगी। क्यों, क्योंकि अगर प्राइस बढ़ेगा तो फिर ग्रेटर डिमांड है, तो फिर लेसर यील्ड है। अब इसको देखने का एक और तरीका क्या है, अगर किसी चीज का हाई प्राइस है तो उसका लो यील्ड रहेगा, और सिंस किसी चीज का हाई प्राइस है, उसका हाई प्राइस है ही इसीलिए क्योंकि वो सेफर ऑप्शन है, क्योंकि उसके पीछे लोअर रिस्क है, तभी तो उस डायरेक्शन में ज्यादा पैसा फ्लो करेगा, तभी तो उस डायरेक्शन में मोर पीपल वुड बी प्रिफर टू हैव दैट बॉन्ड, एंड दैट वुड मीन दैट द बोरोइंग मस्ट बी मेड चीपर फॉर द अदर थिंग्स। वरना लोग कोई दूसरा बॉन्ड खरीदेंगे ही नहीं, लोग केवल एनएफयू का ही बॉन्ड खरीदेंगे। लेट मी एक्सप्लेन इट अगेन। एनएफयू का बॉन्ड है जो कि जिसका प्राइस हाई चल रहा है, जिसकी यील्ड भी लो है। क्यों, क्योंकि वो सेफर एंड लो रिस्क ऑप्शन है। तो फिर मोस्ट ऑफ द मनी वुड बी गोइंग टू द एनएफयू बॉन्ड, क्योंकि वो सेफ बॉन्ड है। भाई लोग बोलेंगे कि मेरे को 2 पैसा कम दे दे, पर मेरे को सेफ इन्वेस्टमेंट चाहिए, मेरे को पैसा डुबाना नहीं है। पर अब लेट से कोई बंदा है कि एक्स बंदा है कोई, या फिर वाई बंदा है कोई, ई बंदा है कोई, जी बंदा है, जो भी वी बंदा है, जो भी कोई बंदा है, व्हाट हैपेंस if they also like put bonds and they will say that like मैं 100 रुपए का बॉन्ड निकालता हूं और मैं 9 रुपए से ही दूंगा तुमको इंटरेस्ट। तो लोग बोलेंगे कि नहीं, मेरे को तुम्हारा बॉन्ड नहीं चाहिए। एक तो तुम्हारा बॉन्ड उतना सेफ वर्दी नहीं है, दूसरी बात क्या है कि तुम्हारी यील्ड भी कम है, तो फिर तुमको रिस्क, तुमको अगर सेफर बॉन्ड चाहिए, अगर कोई बंदा एनएफयू से ज्यादा सेफ रहेगा तभी वो एनएफयू से कम ज्यादा प्राइस में ट्रेड हो रहा होगा, कम यील्ड पे ट्रेड हो रहा होगा. मोर द रिस्क, more the yield. Why? Because there will be lower the price. But if there is a higher risk, it means that there is a lower demand, and it means that there is a lower price. I hope like you got this thing. So that's how the borrowing must be made cheaper if there is a high price and low yield. Similar is the case with like lesser yield would mean that there is a lesser return on interest, and that would mean that there is a easy availability of credit, क्योंकि कोई और एवेन्यूज बनेंगे ही नहीं. स्पेकुलेटिव वैल्यू ऑफ मनी जो रहेगी वो ऐसे रहेगी. ये कॉन्सेप्ट बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. एटलीस्ट लाइक एवरी ईयर और अल्टरनेट ईयर पे ये कॉन्सेप्ट पे क्वेश्चंस आते ही आते हैं कि बॉन्ड की फेस वैल्यू क्या रहती है, बॉन्ड की यील्ड क्या रहती है, बॉन्ड कैसे यील्ड प्राइस डिमांड इनका मैकेनिज्म फ्लो होता है. आई होप लाइक आई एम एबल टू कन्विंस इट. अब देखो, सिंस यू डू नो दैट increase in price leads to decrease in bond yield, and decrease in bond yield leads to easy credit. So if let's say a central bank start purchase of the bond, what it means that it actually creates a demand for the bonds, and demand for the bonds means that there is a increase in price of the bonds, and increase in the price of the bonds means that like what it means, there is a decrease in yield. So it means that interest rate decreases. And this decrease in interest rate would means that there is an increase in demand, increase in purchasing power, and there is a economic growth. It also means that since RBI is purchasing the bonds, it is infusing the money in the economy. It would also mean that monetary supply in the economy increases, aggregate demand increases, and there is a economic growth. And also it means that there is a positive market sentiment. Like I've talked about, money not only has the actual value, but it also has a speculative value. There is speculation related to it, there is a signaling to it, there is a price stability to it, परसेप्शन टू इट, सब कुछ ये रहता ही है. तो ये सेंटिमेंट्स जो है ना, सिंस आरबीआई इज परचेसिंग द बॉन्ड्स, people feel that the highest monetary authority is actually investing, is buying the bonds, it's buying the corporate debt as well. So they would feel that economy of that country, the markets of that country are reliable. Why? Because RBI is buying the debt now. If let's say they are unreliable, then RBI wouldn't be buying them. But since they are, only because they are reliable, RBI or the central government is purchasing them, it provides the positive market sentiment, and it actually provides for the impetus for the investment as well. So under the quantitative easing, central bank purchases bonds and financial assets from the banks and financial institutions for the predetermined period, with the purview of increasing the monetary supply, promoting the aggregate demand, and producing the economic growth. Then reducing the bond yields by increasing the bond prices, and making the credit available cheaper, thus promoting the investment, promoting the growth, and also creating the positive sentiments amongst the people. So here it is, like central bank buys the bonds, bond prices increases, interest rate decreases, investment increases, and economic growth increases. The concept which I have talked about. The effect of quantitative easing on the developed economies is pretty much known. However, what its impact on the emerging economies is actually needs to be studied a bit. So the increase in the quantitative easing actually promotes the forex influx in the developed countries. So in the developing countries, in developing countries, how would it be? So if let's say someone is in America and he got cheaper credit, but since interest rate in America are very low, so he has the excess of money and he needs to find alternate investment opportunities. Since investment opportunities which are like of the limited risk in America are giving low yield, क्योंकि bond prices high है. So what it looks for other markets, other emerging opportunities to ensure that the return on investment for them is the highest. So what they do is they tend to move to the emerging economics like India, economies like India, and thereby they start investing via FPI, which is the foreign portfolio investment, and via FDI, which is like the foreign direct investment, leading to the forex inflow. And since there is a forex inflow in developed countries, uh, developing countries, it may mean that there is a currency appreciation. Why? If let's say people from USA want to invest in NFU, which is situated in India, they would have to go to RBI, they would have to exchange their dollars with the rupees, and those rupees, and they would be asking for rupees from the RBI to invest in NFU. So demand for rupees increases, demand for dollars decreases, and by that rupees they would give to me and Naman, so that like they are investing in NFU. So currency may appreciate in this case. However, people may say that like with the appreciation of currency, there can be a case of reduced exports. However, it is generally observed that exports are actually increased in this case. How exports are actually increased? Let's say in USA, there is a quantitative easing and there is a cheaper credit available. So there are cheaper money available. So they would be having greater demand. अब greater demand है तो फिर अब वो यूएसए के तो products खरीदेंगे ही, but there would be greater demand, greater market for the Indian products as well now. So they will ask for Indian products. So again, it's a interdependent thing, but it's generally been observed. So impact on the emerging economy must be well understood by you, and it can only be understood if you have the good command over whatever I talk in the earlier. So how the forex inflow increases? There is a cheaper credit, there is a more availability of dollar, and since the return on investment in the USA is low, why? Because there is a lower bond yield. So the money is looking for alternate investment opportunities, and the alternate investment opportunities are presented by the emerging economies. That's why the people would start to invest in emerging economies via FPIs, via FDIs, and this increase in forex interest may lead to appreciation of rupees, and additional purchasing power would actually create additional market and additional demand for the Indian products, or let's say developing countries products. So that would also mean there is an increase in exports from the countries as well. So in the developing countries like India, the impact would be like increase in foreign investments, increase in portfolio investment, increase in forex influence, and so on. However, like there are issues with it as well. The issue in includes that the quantitative easing is not a permanent measure; it's an extraordinary measure, and it's like resorted only in cases where like the conventional instruments are not being in place. So like CRR, SLR, bank rates, swaps, etc. like instruments, when they are not working, then only central banks resort to such program of asset buying process, such program of asset purchase. And other thing is, you can say that like they have been resorted like in cases of extreme situations, like that of COVID, like that of 2008 subprime crisis, and so on. Also, like when so when once you have started the quantitative easing, you have started buying of the government and corporate bonds. The central banks are often questioned like when to withdraw them. So when the withdrawal happens, it often becomes a case of confusion. Case of withdrawal becomes case of confusion, case of like anxiety, case of unreliable perception, and so on. So what does there would be like the unconsensus or disagreements between the actors in the central monetary authority about like how much to reduce, when to stop, how much to stop, when to continue, and so on. So the withdrawal of the asset buying program itself becomes a cause of concern, which happened in 2023 2024, whereby which was called as taper tantrums, where the withdrawal of the US Fed from the asset buying program was often like questioned by the economists across the globe for their uncertainty, for the confusion, for the unreliability that they do, and so on. So this withdrawal, also called as a tapering of quantitative easing, and the taper tantrums associated with it, is the like most significant and most major drawback associated with it. Also the quantitative easing is only prominent in case of developed countries and not so great in terms of developing countries like India, is because the demand for money is already high in case of India. So uh, 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 if let's say we start the quantitative easing, and at some point if we would have to do the tapering and reduce the asset buying program of the RBI, then that would actually create significant havoc. Why? Because the economy itself wants the high amount of money as always. Why? Because we are a developing economy, we have like informal economy, we have rising middle class, we are rising consumerist, our industries, our economies, our MSMEs, our households need consistent, cheaper, and reliable credit. So in that case, tapering or like having and not having of the quantitative easing would be a bit challenging to manage overall. So what happens overall, the economies or monetary authorities of the developing countries like India don't resort to such programs. I hope like this is clear. uh, Here we'll stop for this session. Tomorrow I'll be discussing about monetary policy framework in India and what sort of instruments there exist in India with respect to the control of monetary policy. Please pay great attention to this concept of bonds, the concept of quantitative easing, how does credit creation works in India, what are different ways of functioning of monetary policy, because this area is like the poorest area of the economy, and at least 2 3 questions every year come from this area, or options from these concepts are in exam. uh, Understand the concept rather than like mugging them up, visualize the interlinkages, visualize the connections, visualize the elements and the flows that exist between the various actors of the economy to arrive at thinking by yourself. And if you have any doubt, any questions, please get back to me. I'm there to solve any query for yours. I hope like this is working for you, and just like internalize it, study it, discuss it, think it, ponder on it, and we'll be like continuing this tomorrow. Till then, I mean, all the best, and always Jai Hind.